So today I want to talk about the positioning of White Forest going into crossover breakers meta. I recently made a video on the positioning of White Forest in Rage of the Abyss, and I was relatively pessimistic, mostly talking about the primary non-engine driving forces of the meta right now, which is Mulcharmy Foolos at number 1, probably Dimension Shifter at number 2, and then somewhere around there you also have Mulcharmy Perulia. To some degree you have D-Barrier and Droll and Lockbird, but it's really Foolos that is shaping the game. Decks that can fit 6 Charmies, so including Perulia, are very, very good against White Forest, and D-Shifter is basically a blowout. Droll doesn't seem to be as popular as I thought it might have been, but now we're getting another shakeup with Crossover Breakers. So just for anyone who's not paying attention, Crossover Breakers is before Supreme Darkness, which means we are not playing with Azamina LZ. So that card is coming in the following set, which is why it's not included in this deck profile. Now, the deck that I am basing this video off of is a relatively pure take on White Forest Toy, but also including an Azamina engine. And I'm doing that really because this is probably the most popular variant, at least according to people that comment on my videos or in the Discord. So I want to use this as a base and show what kind of template you might be looking at using in Crossover Breakers format. Now, I want to focus on Ryzeal as the most important deck of the format and talk about how well positioned or not we are against that deck in particular. So let's first talk a little bit about what that format might look like, which is still somewhat speculative because the cards haven't been released yet, but they're almost out, and then talk about why you might want to make certain choices in your main deck like Eclipse, Talents, and Thrust. Okay, so first of all, let me go over just 3 of the Ryzeal cards. First, you have Detonator. So this is the boss monster of the deck. This requires 2+ level 4 Ryzeal monsters. When your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can attach 1 material from this card, then target 1 card on the field, destroy it. So this is not once per turn or once per chain. This is just whenever your opponent activates a card or effect. As long as you have a material that you can detach, you can use this effect. It does target, but you can have, reliably 3 materials on this almost every time you summon it. Usually one of those is Aggregator, which will, in a new chain, target a face-up card on the field and negate its effects. And you have lots of ways of recycling this card out of turn so that you can continue using it, even if you've been hit by a breaker or a hand trap or whatever. Then it says, you can only use each of the following effects of Detonator once per turn. If this card is special summoned, you can attach 1 monster from your graveyard to it as material. This is really just a bonus effect that basically ends up giving it another pop. It's also the thing that usually gives it the Aggregator as material, but that line is not always what this deck goes for. If an XYZ monster you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can attach 1 material from this card instead. Obviously that protects itself. So this has some inbuilt protection, and if you try to do something like start your turn with an Imperm and target Detonator, what often can happen is they will Detonator pop itself, and then use this card, Ryzeal Plugin, to bring it back. So this one is a quick play spell where you can target an XYZ monster or Ryzeal monster in your graveyard or banishment, so this still works even if they were under Shifter, special summon it, then you can attach 1 Ryzeal card from your deck to 1 rank 4 XYZ monster you control as material. Also, you cannot declare attacks for the rest of this turn, except with rank 4 XYZ monsters. So even if they were under Shifter, and you were to plug in and bring back out the Detonator, and then attach it with something from your deck, the Detonator itself doesn't care what material it attaches from the grave. So like if they shifted themselves, Shifter would be in the grave, and that is a monster that can be attached to this as material. So plugin basically is like the biggest possible insurance policy to make sure that your Detonator still stays live on the field. The last card that I want to go over is Ryzeal Cross, which is the field spell. And the reason I'm covering just these 3 cards is because these are really the 3 Ryzeal cards that you want on your end board. You want access to Detonator. Not every list plays Hole Thruster, but many do. You want to have plug-in as your insurance policy, and the field spell is crazy. So you cannot XYZ summon monsters with the same name as a card you control, which is not a super major restriction. You can target 2 Ryzeal cards in your graveyard, except itself, place them on the bottom of the deck in any order, then draw 1 card. So there's good resource recursion there. You can only use this effect of Cross once per turn. Once per turn, when an opponent's activated monster effect resolves, you can detach 1 material from a Ryzeal XYZ monster you control, and if you do, negate that effect. So what's important about this is that this is not a trigger effect, this is not a quick effect, this is not something that is added to the chain in any way. This happens during resolution in the middle of the chain. So your opponent could activate Nibiru, and you could Ryzeal cross and negate the Nibiru and then just detach a material from a Ryzeal XYZ monster you control. There could be 17 chain links in a given chain, and you can just go down to chain link 7 and then choose to use Ryzeal cross. So this card is very hard to play around, and what you'll often see in Ryzeal mirror matches is they will often send the aggregator to the graveyard to try to target the cross and negate the cross and then deal with the detonator. So these 3 cards are basically the cards that determine the kind of end board of Ryzeal. Okay, so now this brings us back to White Forest. Because Ryzeal is expected to be the strongest deck of the format, you have to be able to deal with these types of cards, otherwise your deck is probably not going to be very good. This is assuming that Ryzeal takes over a huge portion of representation. So let's for a moment just stick with those assumptions that you need to be able to deal with Detonator and ideally the plug-in and cross combination. So why have I chosen to go with a power spell approach here? Well, the main reason is, if you look at Ryzeal mirror matches or any type of match with Ryzeal, when Ryzeal is being hit with hand traps, the typical Ryzeal deck will have close to 20 hand traps, sometimes even 20 hand traps. That's the basic kind of like cookie cutter list that most people are playing. If you look at OCG lists right now, you'll see that almost every single OCG list, in fact, if you go on Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta, every single OCG list in the current top decks from the OCG that are Ryzeal are all on hand traps, and like a lot of hand traps. So hand traps are expected, at least in the OCG, to be dominating the non-engine of the game. And in the TCG, because this deck can play hand traps and has such high quality starters and extenders, they're probably also going to play hand traps in this meta. Now that means that 2 cards become better, or at least stay relevant, and that is Thrust and Talents. Also remember that Ryzeal can main or side Shifter. Because Malice is coming out in the same set, I'm not going to go into that right now. I suspect that they will not be maining Shifter, because the existence of Malice and Tempai at the same time means that you're probably not really going to be getting net benefit out of using Shifter. So Shifter is probably going to be something that will be in the side deck for them. They don't have to play it, but it probably will be in the side deck. So you still want to have turn skip cards like Thrust to search for Barrier. Barrier is something that you could argue maybe wasn't as good as Different Dimension Ground, because DDG would hit the fire decks harder, or at least they would hit the Snake Eyes deck a lot harder than D-Barrier. But now with Ryzeal being probably the best deck, D-Barrier is just obviously the better choice. And also, you don't hurt yourself by DDGing and then not being able to play on your opponent's turn if you had any play set up to begin with. So the D-Barrier is kind of like a lot safer, because you wouldn't be calling Synchro anyhow. So the triple thrust with the 1D barrier in the main is kind of like your insurance policy for being hit with not just Shifter, but any hand trap. And remember, we're going on the assumption that these Ryzeal decks are playing like 17 to 20 hand traps in a typical deck. So the thrust that you draw is going to be live basically every single turn no matter what, even if they don't control a single monster. Talents basically has kind of like the same reasoning for that, aside from not being able to reach thrust. So obviously you can draw 2 cards, or if you're trying to break boards, you can take. And the thing that's important here is if you're playing against a Ryzeal deck, you can't play enough hand traps for hand traps to be worth it against that deck in a typical hand. You'd have to play so many hand traps that it's not worth it playing a White Forest deck. Your deck would be very inconsistent. You'd have to take these, let's say 10 cards right here, and then add on almost another 10 cards here, and remove one of the major engines of your deck if you are, for example, opting to play the Wanted engine. This really could be a stand-in for anything else. You could be playing Centurion, you could be playing Super Heavy Samurai, you could be playing Horus, you could be playing lots of different types of things. This is really just a stand-in where you have the White Forest cards, you have the toy engine, and then you have some other supplementary engine. This just happens to be one of the most popular ones, or one of the ones that people enjoy playing the most. So that's why I'm including that here. So you don't have enough space for the hand traps, and your deck isn't good enough to play that number of hand traps. So given that you can't hand trap Ryzeal to death, you have to win on power spells. So what will happen on a typical board is, let's say that you talents to take. Because you haven't hand trapped them, they're going to have Detonator and probably at least one other monster on the field. One of the monsters that is being made somewhat commonly now is this card. So this card has just one relevant effect. It says, while this XYZ summoned monster is on the field, your opponent cannot target monsters you control with 2,000 or more attack with card effects. Also, they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. So if we go back to the Ryzeal stuff right now, and you look at Detonator, which has 3000 attack, or if the Duo Drive is on field, it may have more, and the Star Leech card may also have more. You can't target or destroy those cards. So if you talents to try to take, they can just chain Detonator, pop itself, and because they would have set up plug-in because you didn't hand trap them, then they can plug in and get it back. And so you're going to be left taking another monster that's probably not as useful. That being said, being able to get past the first Detonator is just like the basic entry requirement for having a chance at dealing with the deck. Once you've done that, which you could potentially do with a single card like Talents, then you have a chance to continue playing with whatever is in the rest of your hand. Now, unfortunately, it does seem kind of like you need to draw 2 power spells to be able to reliably have a chance against the Ryzeal board, because if you talents to take and they chain Detonator, pop itself, this isn't coming back until the chain resolves. So you're going to talents take something else that's not Detonator, and when they bring back the Detonator and attach a material off of plugin, and then this attaches something else off of its own effect, they're still going to have at least 2 pops. If you haven't dealt with the field spell, they're also going to have a monster negate from the field spell. So 1 power spell in like a decent case scenario is going to leave them with 2 pops on the Detonator and a negation on the Ryzeal Cross. So this is not good. So I think that actually you maybe need to play slightly more than this number of power spells. I feel like going to 12 is probably a slightly better type of number. And at that point, you need to be considering more carefully, are you going to go over 40 and how many cards can you actually fit into your deck? Now, for the sake of this particular engine, if we just say we are playing the Deception and the Wanted engine, and we don't really want to decrease these cards, and you don't want to take out, you know, like the 3 Soldiers or a Rota, because these are the cards that actually work with each other. You don't want to hamstring your own deck. I feel like it's probably better to just go up to something like 43 cards in the main and play some other very useful thrust targets. The problem is that once you get beyond these cards here, like the Eclipse, Talents, and Thrust, you start to have a much harder time finding cards that are useful both first and second. So one card that I think could make a comeback is the Goat. So Black Goat. So this card is pretty interesting against Ryzeal. So obviously there's the first effect where you can declare a monster card name. This turn, neither player can special summon monsters with that original name except from the graveyard, but realistically that's not what you're going to be using this for. You can banish this card from the graveyard, which means that if you got shifted, you can't use this effect. Then declare 1 monster card name. This turn, neither player can activate the effects of monsters on the field with that original name. So the reason that I think this card is actually super important and could be your last couple spots here in the deck is, wait, let me make this look a little bit better. Okay, so here are the cards that you don't want to draw at the bottom here, and here are your power spells, and we're including Goat, or the Black Goat, in the power spell list. So now we're getting to 9, 10, 11, and I think maybe with 12 you might feel a little bit more comfortable, but you know, going above 42, 43 is starting to become slightly risky in a multi-card combo deck. Anyhow, so moving on here, the thing that makes this very interesting against Ryzeal is that this does not target anything, this does not choose anything. When you call the name, it means that the Detonator, whether or not it goes to the grave and comes back off a plugin or whatever, how they could move it, put it in their extra deck, summon it back 73 times, but you've still declared the monster card name. So I feel like this is something that might be, if people are not considering this in this deck right now, this might be grossly underlooked, even to the point where you might even want to consider playing 3 of these. If you followed any of my previous videos before, you'll see that I was a huge fan of this in the Runic variants, but I feel like it's very dangerous to play Runic in a format where people are going to be on Shifter, maybe they're going to be on Droll, and I think Cosmic Cyclone might also become better, especially because you do need to have reliable outs to stuff like the Ryzeal Cross, and this one only negates monster effects, so it can't protect itself from the Cosmic Cyclone. So yeah, the Goat was a little bit better in the Runic variant because you could get it into the grave as early as your own draw phase, and that was obviously extremely strong. In this case, you know, they don't have anything to Detonator when you go main phase 1. Like if you activate Wanted in your on your draw phase, for example, like they're not going to Detonator to the Wanted, you know? So like I feel like it's pretty safe to where you have your 6th card in hand and you're like, okay, let's say that you have like an LZ, or you have like a Witch, you have some type of discard outlet, and you put this in the grave, you're probably still going to get one thing popped by the Detonator, but you at least will be able to use the GOAT, and you're going to majorly reduce the number of pops that the Detonator has. So I think this is cool because this is almost like a White Forest card at this point. There are not really many decks that are playing this particular card at the moment, or at least not that I know of. And so I think that this is one of the cards that you should really consider for the upcoming format. And that's really just because so much of their power is concentrated in this one particular card and bringing it back off of the plugin. Now, it is worth mentioning that this is not just like a free win type scenario, because A, they're still going to get at least one Detonator pop. Like, if you activate LZ and you dump GOAT, that's kind of the best case scenario, because you've sent, so if we just like look here, this is sending for cost, right? Every single White Forest player knows that. If you send this for cost, before this even gets on the field or resolves, you can chain the GOAT in the grave and they won't have anything to target with Detonator. So when this resolves and you know your LZ comes out and you've searched whatever and you start doing your plays, their Detonator can't pop anything. But if you don't have LZ, then you're in like a substantially worse situation, because it's like, you could normal summon the Esteller. For example, like if it was a Stellar and GOAT that you drew, you could normal Esteller, send the GOAT. You're gonna lose the Esteller because they're gonna chain the Detonator to the Esteller effect, at least to get this off board. And then, you know, extenders like Ryzeal don't really work because you don't have a name on field type of scenario. So yeah, I feel like it's probably going to be a little bit polarizing how this card works depending on the hand that you've drawn, and really LZ is kind of like the major important piece here. So yeah, I think that's kind of like most of what I wanted to talk about for now. I plan on getting some gameplay against Ryzeal to show off some of the scenarios that I'm talking about. I haven't had a lot of time to make videos recently. The last thing that I'll say is I haven't decided about the extra deck right now in this particular version of the deck. I do think that playing the Nib Veiler specifically in the context of it being searchable through your combo with the Gallant Granite and the Arciella is still good. And this card actually can be quite good against Ryzeal depending on the board setup. Obviously, if you've gone first, this is a very different situation to if you've gone second and you are going to lose because you can't hand trap them properly. So having this through an established board of your own is really good. I'm not sure if I've decided that it is optimal in this particular format, so that's still yet to come. The last thing that I wanted to say is that these Ryzeal cards are light and fire, but the Detonator is light, and there will, unless they've shifted, there should be a light monster in the grave, which means that this card, which you could always make forever since the beginning of time, is a very realistic card to make. And because you're playing the wanted engine, so if you are not playing this engine and you're playing something else, I probably would not recommend this. It is much more realistic that you will be able to meet the condition of Selene and have sufficient spells on field or in the graveyard to where that you can special summon something out with this card, and then you can go into access code Talker. So having multiple different routes to go for OTKs in a deck that doesn't necessarily OTK with ease, I think could be a pretty good addition to the deck. But this does require a little bit more testing. So if you have any suggestions, let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.